As you can tell, I love being in my sewing room, and especially when you are here with me. Today I have some wonderful techniques to share with you. One that has intrigued me for years is the Prairie point. To update the technique, we will learn about embellished Prairie points. Once you learn this fun technique, you're going to find many uses for it. We're also going to learn more about scrapbooking, although I think it should be called sewbooking. After all, the sewing techniques we use make our pages very special. Thread your needles and let's get started. This suit is absolutely magnificent, and you're going to see one of your favorite tricks, Prairie points. Prairie points are used so creatively. On the collar, the Prairie points have a little machine embroidery with a tiny little bead and purchased trim. Down on this pretty tie, if you look real carefully out of the sheer fabric, I might add, you can see Prairie points and those wonderful, very fashionable beads. The sleeve on this jacket intrigues me. They have the sheer Prairie points and the linen Prairie points, and then another wonderful machine embroidered trim right above that series of Prairie points. And don't you think the color is so pretty? Just so bright and colorful. Now, first of all, to do the linen Prairie points, you get a tiny little design. It has to be small enough to fit in the Prairie point. Embroider it on the top portion and then fold it under. Now, you do have to measure to find out how long to make this Prairie point. So after you measure on how far around the sleeve you're going to go, you go ahead and cut it off. Now, Prairie points, to make them, it's just a simple folding technique. The fabric has been double back. I fold it under. I fold it under, and there's my Prairie point. Now, sheer fabric is real slippery and hard to do anything with, as all of you know. So I've used freezer paper with the sheer fabric ironed to it. Here it is, and you're going to cut it out. And by the way, that freezer paper makes it easy to fold. I've cut it out, and now then I'm ready to do the folding technique to make the Prairie point, and we have a real trick for how that happened. Here is the machine embroidered strip that's going to go on the cuff. The next step is to serge the strip and then attach your purchased trim, and that is very easy to do. I'm so happy to have as my guest today Jewell Hulitt. Jewell is an educational consultant for the Singer Sewing Company. Jewell, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. It's great being here.
And these wonderful techniques, I want you just to get started.
Well, I could be here all day.
You love Prairie points,
I love Prairie points.
And I do too.
And you see them on quilts and on our garments, but we're going to go one step further, and we're going to embellish our Prairie points. So we're going to begin with our sheer Prairie points. What we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of freezer paper with the shiny side to the wrong side, fussy cut a square of sheer, and what we want to do is make sure that it's fused to the sheer square. And then the next step is, once we've cut our perfect 5-inch square, we're going to then take and fold the square in half, wrong sides together, leaving the freezer paper on the sheer fabric. And then we're going to, of course, make and form our Prairie point, taking the corners to the center, as you can see what I've done here. Now we're going to remove the freezer paper, and it's just perfect. It forms, because we pressed it, you can see how it forms perfectly. How easy is that?
It just jumped into place.
It did. So it doesn't make it difficult at all. Okay, next, what we want to do is we want to then, on our linen Prairie points, we want to embroider our little design on our linen. And then what we want to do is we want to remove it from the hoop, and then we want to fold so the Prairie point is on top here, and we want to make sure, we want to measure a 1/2 inch from the fold to the embroidery, to the end of the embroidery design. And then we want to find the center of the embroidery, and then we want to measure, we want to measure the center, and then we want to measure 2.5 inches on each side of the center point, so we have then the length will be our 5-inch Prairie point square. Okay, and then of course we want to, again, we want to fold it, the corners to the center, to form our prairie point, our perfect prairie point. And then we want to create our embroidered strip here, our band. And so what we want to do, the first step is to embroider our little daisies. And where I got the daisy design is I took the design from the print on my sheer fabric that I used.
Okay.
And that's where I got the little design. And then once you embroider the strip, then you want to make an 1.5 inches. You want to trim it to an 1.5 inches strip and then serge each side. And then the last step is you want to add the lace on each side. So then we've created our beautiful embroidered strip, our band. And then once we have completed our prairie points, you take your sleeve, and what you want to do is you want to measure how far you want to go up from the hem of your sleeve. And what's important is that what I have done is I fold the hem down, so I know that when I take my prairie points, I want to place the prairie point so I have 1 inch from the prairie point to the hem. Okay, then we're going to place the prairie points on each side of my sleeve, and then we're going to place the center prairie point. And you want to make them evenly placed. And then you want to take your sheer prairie points, and then you want to lay those on top of your linen prairie points. And then you want to even put one sheer prairie point on the edge. And of course, then once you sew that the prairie points to the sleeve, then you'll trim this when you seam the sides. And then the last step then is you place the band here over the raw edges of your prairie points. And then you top stitch that. And there you've got your prairie points.
Oh, I'm telling you.
Embellished prairie points.
Jewel, it is so beautiful. Let me hold this up one more time, and let's look at this sleeve so everyone can see one more time how beautiful that is. And you know, you just make it seem so easy, and I think it really is easy, but you especially make it seem easy.
Thank you.
Jewel, thank you so much for this beautiful suit. And now Jewel has some sewing inspirations for you. Jewel, I know you have some more prairie points techniques for those that don't have an embroidery machine, so go ahead and share that with us.
Thank you. Not everyone, as you say, has an embroidery machine, so we're going to follow the same steps that we did when we used our sheer prairie points and our linen embroidered prairie points. Just go ahead and follow the same steps with our prairie points, but instead of embroidered little flowers, go to your fabric store and purchase the little silk flowers instead of embroider them. Another idea, if you have some really special buttons that you want to use for children or whatever you're making, that's what you can do is get some little buttons and put a little button on each prairie point. So there's a lot of ideas. Here's some trim that you can get, and it's actually where you can cut off just one little flower. And you can, again, place it on one of your darker prints and put a little bead in the center.
All right.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yes, absolutely.
And Martha, here are some other ideas.
Honey, that wonderful beads, I love it.
Yes, this is purchased ribbon. And, you know, beads are so popular. So what is great on this is that, like, for example, on the bottom of a lampshade, for example, in home deck, let's use prairie points, beaded prairie points, in our home deck.
Oh, that's fabulous.
And what about sheer fabric? Let's go ahead and make a square satin and then fold it but cover it with sheer embroidered sheer fabric and place it over your satin and make a prairie point.
And you still have your embroidery,
don't you? And you still have your embroidery. And let's go ahead and make little prairie points and put a buttonhole inside the prairie point.
How
and
cute.
Look what happens. You can unbutton your prairie
Jewel.
point.
That is
so that's fun. And another idea is insert piping in front of your prairie points. That's an idea. Another home deck, idea for Prairie Points is you add lace and then have more of a Victorian lace Prairie Point. And again, here's some ideas on embroidered Prairie Points. And another idea is add ribbon to your Prairie Points, and then you can tie your folded Prairie Points together with your ribbon. And last, add some lace, some pretty lace to your Prairie Points.
Now, wouldn't those last two be adorable in a baby nursery?
They would.
I love it. Jewel, you have some
Absolutely.
other wonderful things. Tell us about this beautiful lavender blouse.
Well, this was using our pin tuck foot and creating pin tucks, your horizontal pin tucks in the inside of the blouse, and then using a built-in embroidery stitch.
This is beautiful, and almost everyone would have a few decorative stitches, wouldn't
Any
they?
of your favorite decorative stitches would work.
Okay. Oh, this is so fascinating, your technique. Tell our viewers about it.
Well, this was really fun, and believe it or not, this was very, very easy. What I did is I just laid my tricot fabric down on my table, and I took baby yarn, and I placed the baby yarn on the tricot, and then I took some water-soluble stabilizer, and I placed that on top of the yarn with my embroidery foot and monofilament nylon thread in the needle, and I just stippled over the yarn. And then I cut my little jacket out and put a little embroidery on it, and it
looks like a hand knit jacket.
It does.
This is fascinating. And your beautiful pillow.
my heirloom pillow, again, I love my built-in stitches, so I picked out one of my favorite built-in stitches, and I couched over some ribbon. I stitched over ribbon and inserted some lace.
And then this beautiful, beautiful box.
Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, it is a beautiful box.
It's silk dupioni, and we covered it, added some decorative stitches on the side of the box with our rose embroidery, and then inside the box, you've got a little marriage
That is
blessing.
so beautiful. Can you see that? The marriage blessing.
Yes.
This is such a lovely wedding gift. Oh my goodness. And then this beautiful pillow.
Yes, that was just embroidered on silk organza on a square and with some continuous lace designs.
And with the
then
monogram.
your monogram letter.
And one more beautiful monogram. Look at this. This is a bell pull.
It is. And you've got your beautiful designs with your monogram letter. And
That has an M. That might be for Martha.
well, of course.
Jewel, you have just brought the most wonderful things. Thank you for your lovely lesson on Prairie
Well,
Points.
thank you very much
And these
for having
beautiful projects you brought, and that wonderful little pink jacket that you did with yarn. Oh my goodness.
That was fun.
Thank you so much. And now we have some scrapbooking ideas for you. Jewel, I cannot wait for you to share with everyone your sew booking. Scrapbooking
I
has a
surely
new name
am.
now. You have the most beautiful pages.
Thank you. So the first sew booking page I want to show you is this little guy here on the tractor. And what we did is we just cut out that little boy picture and we put him in this stitched pocket and we put a little trim around it and just added some buttons and used some of our decorative stitches and made appliques. Simple,
Darling.
but cute.
Darling.
And then the next one, my family went camping, so I had to make a camping sew booking page. And on the letters, what I did individually is I sewed on leather and cut each individual letter out. And so that formed the camping word. And then I embroidered little camping designs and cut them out and glued them on.
That is so dark. You actually did machine embroidery on leather.
I did.
I love it.
I surely did. And here's a little sew booking page. And what we did is we made a little embroidered frame out of fabric and using a built-in zigzag machine stitch on the paper and put it together with some little sewing items.
Adorable.
And here we've got some little baby applique designs, and then we framed little pictures with a built-in decorative stitch around the frame of the picture.
And the little buttons.
And of course added buttons. And here we've got a 4th of July sew booking page, and again using one of our nice decorative built-in stitches, and just framed the pictures again, and again using the blanket binding stitch in the oval frame. And this one, we got a new little baby in the neighborhood, so I just had to make a sew booking page for this little girl here, Brielle. And so what I did is I put 3 little squares on one side, and I stitched the 3 squares on the sew booking page. And what I did is I just centered my presser foot, and I started sewing the blanket binding stitch down the side of the paper. And when I completed that, then what I did is I took my crewel needle and I went in and out of my blanket binding stitch.
Just kind of did some weaving.
That added a little bit of dimension, and it turned out really pretty.
Oh, Jewel.
And then I printed out on paper her name and so forth, and then I just tore the paper and then stitched it onto the squares.
Well, Jewel, you just get an A+ in sew booking. Thank you for all of your creativity and machine embroidery on leather. I love it. Yes. Thank you so very much for being here.
Well, you're very welcome. It's great being here.
And now I have a hand embroidery stitch or two for you. I'm so pleased to have as my guest today Wendy Schoen. Wendy is president of Wendy Schoen Design. She is a frequent designer for So Beautiful magazine and has been for many years. She has studied hand embroidery at the Royal School of Needlework in London and in Madeira, Portugal. Wendy has designed more than 30 heirloom patterns, and she has authored 4 books. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Martha. It's always great to be here. Today, what I would like to talk to you and our viewers about is hand embroidered strawberries. Now, if you look at these strawberries on this cute little dress, you'll see that it is comprised of a series of French knots to form the base of the strawberry, and the top or the leafy part is made out of slant satin stitch with a nice border, and that's what the part we're going to show you right now. So let's begin by looking at this sample. And I'm going to be using a rather large thread, much larger than I would normally use, but I wanted to make sure you could see exactly what I'm doing. Now, whenever I have a design that I'm going to be covering up entirely, I call that a really good place to tie on. So I'm going to take my thread, and I have a waist knot on the end, or just a knot of any kind. And now I'm going to sew into the center of the area that I'm going to stitch on, and I'm going to tie on with 3 little tiny back stitches. Sometimes you can get away with doing 2 instead of 3, and you be the judge of that. Now we're going to outline the area first with a stem stitch. Now, just to review, stem stitch is very easy to do. You begin at the beginning of the line, and the first stitch is twice as long and halfway back. So I'm going to take my first stitch, hold on to the loop, hold it down, and then come back halfway. Okay, once you get all your stem stitch done, that means all the way around, we'll go to the next sample, which I've completed for you. The next thing is to begin the slant satin stitch. And now I'm going to use the same thread, or tie it on again exactly the same way, and begin at the widest angle. So my angle is going to go from the inside of the foundation to the other edge. And this is different than padded satin stitch, because padded satin stitch is a stitch that you would be covering the foundation. This one is a lot easier to do. So what you want to do is just make sure that you keep your angle, establish your angle, and then every stitch that you take, just make sure that it is one beside the other, and the ends will be nicely hidden or camouflaged, let's say, by the border that you've already stitched. And as you all know, padded satin stitch is one of the most difficult stitches to do. This is a great way to get the same look without all the work. All you need to do is just continue to go from side to side, and I am going completely around. I'm going from the bottom to the top. You could actually go from the top to the bottom, it doesn't matter. Just be certain that you're getting your stitches right where they need to go. Don't worry about the ends, like I said before, and stitch it across, and I bet you can do this, because this is easy and it's fun and it's quick.
How many strands of floss do you use, for instance, on the strawberry on the dress?
That's a good question, Martha.
Okay.
I usually always use one strand.
Okay.
When you start using 2 strands, you may think it will take you less time, but actually what happens is it starts to dull the way it looks. The sheen starts to dissipate. In other words, instead of having a nice smooth canvas of stitches, you wind up with 2 threads that can become jumbled together, and it does take away from the final appearance. Now, let's say at this point I needed a new thread, so it's very simple to tie off and on with this technique. All you do is tie off exactly the same way you tied on. Take 3 little stitches inside the area you're going to be covering, and then later we'll show you how to do on another show we'll show you how to do the bottom portion of the strawberry. That will be also another area that you could use to tie off on if you run out of space on the top part.
Now, can I ask you what needle are you using?
Okay, normally I use any needle that is wide enough for the thread that I'm using. So, for example, if you're using stranded cotton or just regular embroidery floss, you probably would want to use a long eye needle such as a crewel needle. But if you're using floche or a round thread, you would want a round eye needle for that.
And what would that be? A round eye needle?
Like a sharp.
Like a sharp.
Or
okay.
a between.
What size sharp?
Well, for floche, I would recommend a 7 between, or you can use a little bit larger needle, like a 4 sharp or something like that.
In other words, you use a lot of different needles.
Yes.
Wendy, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
Absolutely wonderful. And next we have a doll dressing segment for you. The cutest little bumblebee dress you have ever seen. I'm so pleased to have my friend Phyllis Hoffman to tell us about this adorable doll sleeve.
Martha, this is a fabulous dress. But you know, the reason we talk about doll clothes is to learn technique. So let's get right to it. The sleeve is composed of 3 pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of lace. And this is the part I want to concentrate on today, because this is the basis of heirloom sewing. And when we combine our lace with fabric, this is the piece in progress. This is the finished piece with only a slight difference. As you can see, we have stitched the lace to the fabric, and then we overcast. We completely go in and out so that it turns that edge to secure it. And right here is when I normally think, I'm finished, but I'm not. If you'll look at this, there is a tiny zigzag stitch right here, and that will ensure that this piece never comes apart. The same exact technique is used when we put the piece together, and Martha, what is so wonderful about this, the same reinforcing of laying our lace not quite to the edge of the fabric and then overcasting will ensure that this is a sturdy piece. As we finish our assembly, we will use entre-deux, trimmed very close, gathered lace, and we'll zigzag it together. And we'll use the same technique to finish, making sure our pieces stay together beautifully.
Thank you so much, Phyllis. And now won't you come with me to look at a piece of antique clothing? I have a complete fascination for white baby dresses around the turn of the century, the last one that is. This little dress is about 100 years old, and the hand embroidered, there are 2 little wreath-like motifs with a little tiny bow at the bottom. There are 2 on the front of the bodice, and then as we go down to the skirt, those little motifs have been hand embroidered all the way around the bottom of the skirt. They are absolutely precious and very, very simple, and I'll tell you, to do white on white embroidery, I do not know of anything any sweeter. A very interesting sewing detail on most of my antique white baby clothes, and by the way, this is a baby dress, not a christening dress, because it's a simple dress. The hems are simply turned up and straight stitched in with a sewing machine. Thank you so much for joining me in my sewing room today. I would certainly like to invite you to come back next time.